Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm playing duck chess, which is regular chess with the addition of a duck. After each turn, the player moves the duck to an empty square. Then the opponent makes a move, and they move the duck to an empty square. The duck can never be captured. My goal is to win 5 games. Let's get started with game number 1. Okay, I learned a couple of different tactics the first time that I ever played duck chess. And I say I learned tactics, it's more like I got tricked a bunch of times and then I walked away with new information. But the first thing is that after you make your move, you usually want to place the duck in the way of your opponent's next immediate move. So here, duck to e2 stops my opponent's development in a couple of different ways. So for now, that's where I'm going to place the duck. Okay, we get d3 and then duck to a5. We'll go ahead and push d... Oh, that is not d5. Oh, okay. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and play d6. I guess we play the perk modern now and drop the duck back on e2. So we were trying for a Caro-Kann, but that turned into a perk modern right away. We get pawn to d4. It seems my opponent may have misclicked as well. We can just transpose here into a normal Caro-Kann. So we'll push d5 and then duck back to e2. Cool, it's like both of us misclicked and then both of us decided to push one more. Cool, that's fine by me. We get the capture and then the duck to g5. We'll go ahead and take back, place the duck back on e2, stop my opponent's development. I know last time this became like a meme in the comment section where everybody was just commenting. So anyways, there I was placing the duck on e2. That was quite funny. But it's just such a natural square, right? It hinders kingside development, which means there's no castling. Pawn to c4, duck on c6. I'm going to go ahead and buff my center with a knight and place the duck back on e2. And that's another thing, knights in this variant are a little bit OP, right? Queens, perfect example, good timing. Queens, bishops, and rooks all work long range, which means their effect can be cut off by a duck move. A knight can always jump, so the duck really doesn't influence the knight whatsoever, other than maybe stopping it from moving to a square. Queen to a4, we'll go ahead and block with the bishop, and place the duck on b5, with the idea that if my opponent leaves the queen there, then the duck is stuck on this diagonal, or else the queen drops. Okay, we get duck to c6. We are in fact pinning the duck, and the knight moves to c3. Let's go ahead and just play e6, kind of just looking for normal development, and I'll place the duck, I guess back on e2 makes sense, force my opponent to put it back on the diagonal. What? Is that a misclick? Well, okay, I have no idea what this was aiming for, but I'm going to take the queen and then put the duck back on e2. Wow, I'm kind of shocked. Was that... Maybe my opponent thought they were placing the duck first. That would make sense if my opponent was trying to place the duck on c6 and accidentally move the queen there. Wow, that is brutal. Is that a free knight as well? Okay, maybe my opponent just doesn't understand how this works very well. Which is confusing because my opponent played it very well, placed the duck where it was supposed to be placed. Unless that was lucky, but I find that unlikely. Okay, duck to e5, let's give check. Put the duck on d2. Now the duck is pinned and stuck on this diagonal. Oh, nice, and we win the king. Cool. Okay, with that, we win game number 1, and I actually did forget to mention, so those of you that haven't seen duck chess before, you don't get checkmate. There's no such thing as checkmate. It's up to you to see checkmate and make sure that your opponent can't block it with the duck. So that's why there's king captures instead. But anyways, with that, we win game number 1. Let's go ahead and move on to game number 2. All right, game number 2, we get the black pieces again, which I guess is fine. This time I'll be sure to actually click on d5. Oh, that's quite annoying. It's like my opponent read my mind. We get pawn to e4. I can still play c6 though, and then drop the duck on e2. Oh, he says, yo, I'm a fan. That's so funny. All right, we get knight to c3. Oh, the only problem with him being a fan is he knows what I play. He knows that I play c6, d5, so he's just gonna drop the duck on d6. Oh, that's kind of funny. Okay, but we adapt and we overcome. Let's play e6 to at least start getting some pieces out, and then place the duck back on e2. Oh no, okay, duck back to d6, we get pawn to d4, my opponent is not in the slightest bit phased by e6. Let's develop bishop to e7, place the duck back on e2, and I'm gonna have to get a little bit creative with my development, because as long as my opponent keeps playing duck to d6, this is not gonna happen. So what if I try like knight to f6 and then I just castle? There's ideas of e5, knight to d5, it's really not a concrete position, at least in regular chess, but it might work here. Bishop to f4, let's develop the knight. Drop the duck back on e2. Okay, this is kind of what I was hoping for. We get e5 and then duck to h5. And what I mean is that my opponent seems to have lost a little bit of sight of d6. Well, I guess it's well controlled by these two pieces, so maybe not so much. We'll play knight to d5, offer a knight trade, and we'll place the duck back on e2. With any luck, we'll get some kind of overextension and then not a lot of development. Keep the king in the center, and then maybe we can get some sort of counterattack going. We do get capture. I'll take back with my c-pawn and place the duck back on e2. Now if my opponent places the duck on d6, it's not so terrible, because there's still ideas of b6, developing the bishop this way. Okay, we get duck to f8, stopping me from castling, and queen to d3. Let's play knight to c6 with the idea of knight to b4, and we'll place the duck. Actually, okay, this is a perfect time to talk about a different tactic. If you ever want to move a piece to a specific square, you can put the duck on that square so that on the next turn, the opponent has to move the duck away from that square, right? So if I really want to push d6 here to open up the position a little bit, I can place the duck on d6. On my opponent's next move, they have to play something, and then the duck moves away from that square, so I can get d6. Okay, we get knight to e2. The duck, in fact, moves away. Oh, and oh, wait a minute, never mind. I've just realized that was been kind of useless. If I play d6, my opponent will take and then put the duck on d7, and then I just lose a pawn. So that doesn't do anything. Let's go ahead and just castle and place the duck on g3. I don't want my opponent to get too many ideas of attacking on the king side because that would be quite a headache for me to handle. So I don't want like knight to g3, bishop to e2, queenside castle. So I'm going to drop the duck on g3 to stop at least this first knight movement. Okay, we get pawn to c3, and then duck to b6. Okay, actually pawn to c3 also stops knight to b4, so that's very well played. Duck to b6. This is quite a difficult move because it stops b6 and then I can't develop my bishop. So let's play f6 and then duck back to g3. If I can open up the center a little bit, I have more pawns in the center, right? Because of my doubled pawns. So if I can open up the center a little bit, maybe I can get my bishop out. We're looking at some sort of counterplay as opposed to just being basically oppressed in the middle of the board. Okay, we get h4. So the kingside attack is in fact starting and we get duck to f7. Let's go ahead and take on e5 and place the duck on h5 to stop a further advance. I believe that since my opponent's king is still in the center, we may be better off with this kind of activity that's going on in the middle of the board. Okay, ooh, bishop takes, and I like duck to f6 because it stops me from taking on h4, but this bishop is a little bit cramped in the center, and the reason I say it's cramped is because it's looking at my own pawn, it's looking at its own pawn chain, it has no safe squares this way. The only way it can move is back. And the problem with a cramped piece is you can attack it and then put the duck wherever that escape square is. So I believe we've just won the bishop outright after that move. My opponent says, wow, well played. Thanks. You're probably watching this in the future, so good game however this went. Okay, we get a bishop sack, which makes perfect sense. Right now, if I recapture, my king's a little bit exposed, but I still will take the bishop. And as far as the duck goes, I guess I'll put it on f4. Okay, we get queen to g3, gives check, duck placed on f7. First order of business is protect the king, so we'll put him in the corner. And as far as the duck goes, I guess back on f4, right? Now that the queen protects f4, I'm not interested in the knight coming in as well. You know, with some crazy ideas of like checkmate on g7. Okay, we do get long castle, and then the duck is dropped on f6. Let's go ahead and we'll play rook to g8 with the idea of booting the queen, and then duck back to f4 with the idea that, you know, knight to f4 or queen to f4 is no longer possible. Okay, we get rook to d3. Oh, and my opponent decides to defend the queen with the duck, which is a little bit scary because it could mean the duck might get stuck on this file, which isn't necessarily a bad thing for my opponent, but it's worth noting. Let's play e5 and then duck back to f4. I'd like to start opening up some lines for my pieces. Maybe I can grab some more center space, centralize my knights, and just in general, you know, get this kind of wall of pawns off of my pieces and get some piece activity going. This is one of the few games where my opponent has a lot less time than I do. Normally I'm the one in time trouble because I blab my mouth off and then I look at the clock, oh, 10 seconds left. But in this game, I actually do have more time than my opponent. I'll take back with the pawn and place the duck back on f4. Now my opponent can't take, right, and then place the duck blocking my queen because my opponent's own queen is still under attack. Okay, sub 20 for my opponent. Okay, queen moves out of the way, duck moves to d7, so it does cut off my queen's defense of the pawn, but the duck is actually pinned again to the queen. So I'm going to play d4, and I understand it's sacrificing a pawn, but then I'm also going to play duck to g3. I assume my opponent will, oh, okay, my opponent doesn't take, we get the h5 push. I'll push e4, duck back to g3. Rook can't really take because it's defended by the knight. Can't shuffle over because the duck is in the way. So, ooh, rook does take. I will take back and now place the duck on g3 again. No point in overthinking that. Also, as far as the time control goes, this is 5 minutes with 4 seconds of delay. So you do get a decent amount of increment after each move. Let's play check and duck to b1. There's not all that many pieces defending the king anymore. So, okay, knight to e6. Knights are definitely worth more than bishops, so I'll go ahead and trade. And I'll play duck to g4, which gives check and stops my opponent from recapturing the bishop. So my opponent really has no choice but to move the king and then move the duck. I take the queen, and my opponent says I'm cooked in chat. He still played a very good game. We'll play the duck to b3 with the idea of queen to d2. Okay, we do get the recapture. We'll play queen to d2 check. Duck to b3 to force the king back, and then we can force a king capture back here. No way! Oh, I totally forgot! That the bishops don't actually defend anything. Oh my goodness. Okay, let's play check and then block the king's escape. Holy moly, what a comeback. Okay, duck to d2. Let's push e3, duck to c2, I guess is fine. Okay, takes, I take back. Duck back to c2. Okay, duck to d7 hits my bishop. This bishop is on my nerves after losing me my queen. Let's move the bishop all the way back. Duck to f3 to stop the king from advancing, and maybe we can get our opponent kind of twisted. Whoa. King to d3, duck to d4, pins the duck to the king. Let's play... I guess let's just play here. Threaten the pawn, and move the duck to c4. Forces the king to move back. We can pick up a free pawn. Oh! Nice! We win game number 2. Oh, goodness. That is one thing about duck chess, is that it's very hard to calculate. So you have to do every calculation manually. Like, okay, this happens, and this happens, and this happens without too much intuition. But when you're down to, a couple of seconds left on the clock, that's very difficult to keep up. Anyways, with that, we win game number 2. Let's go ahead and move on to game number 3. All right, game number 3. We get the black pieces again. Holy moly. Is it just my day to play the black pieces? Oh, that's so funny. This guy also watches the videos. Hi. Oh, but he canceled the game. Oh, he didn't move in time. Oh, but he offers a rematch? Oh, perfect. Okay, I'm going to play d4 quickly and duck to d6 and then respond. Okay, awesome. We've got the game going and I got the white pieces. Excellent. Yes, very, very good. Which means... I will play, I wonder what opening I should play. Okay, we'll play the London if you guys insist. We'll play the duck back to d6. And we'll just kind of look for normal development. Okay, knight to h6, duck to g5. We'll play e4, capture the center, and then duck back to d6. g5, I believe I can just take g5 and then duck back to d6. Okay, we get a5, duck to d2. I think I can just take the knight and then disconnect the bishop's defense of the knight. So we are up a piece now. Okay, we get pawn to b5, duck back to d2. I will trade the bishops and I guess duck to g8 with the idea that my opponent will have to recapture with the king, and maybe I can look for some kind of attack right away. Maybe we can go queen to h5, knight to f3, knight to g5, look for checkmate on f7. Okay, the king does in fact take back. We get duck to d2. I'm going to develop my knight to f3, place the duck on e8, because I'd rather the king not run back to its starting square. Okay, duck to g5, and then bishop to a6. Duck to g5 actually is quite annoying. It stops knight to g5, so I guess I'll just develop normally. Knight to c3, duck back to e8 to stop also the queen from coming over and defending the pawn. Okay, d6, duck to d2, so I will play knight to g5 now, and then duck back to e8, and with any luck, we can sneak in this little checkmate. Okay, duck to b1, we get b4, which hits the knight, and then also opens up the bishop, but I'm going to play queen to h5, duck back to e8, and it should be pretty difficult for my opponent to defend this. Actually, wait, what am I talking about? My opponent can just take and play, oh, duck to g6! Oh, well-deserved. Well-deserved for trying to sneak in a little checkmate. Well, that didn't happen. All right, let's play this and then block with the duck. My opponent still has ideas of capturing here, threatening promotion with capturing the rook, but there's also checkmate on the board, so it could get a little bit tricky. Ah, we do get duck to b1, which is clever in the sense that it unleashes the rook and it traps my own rook, but it allows queen takes f7 with check, and now I just need to place the duck somewhere unproblematic, so I guess e8 is perfectly fine. It doesn't really matter, because even though this is check, I take the king on the next move. Nice, the king does take the queen, we take back with the knight, and with that, we win game number 3. Nice, pretty straightforward game. Let's go to move on to game number 4. All right, game number 4, we get the white pieces again. So I'm going to play my normal d4, duck to d6. Okay, we get knight to f6, duck to d2, very naturally stopping my development, so I'll develop knight to f3 instead. Okay, e6, duck to e3, which is a little bit less restrictive, but still a little bit annoying. We'll play g2 with the idea of the fianchetto, and then duck to e7 to stop this development. Okay, knight to c6, duck to e3. We do get the fianchetto, and we'll just drop the duck back on e7. Obviously, the goal here is to castle, and then fight for the center, but fight for the center knowing that my opponent's king is still there, whereas mine is safe. Okay, duck to f1 stops me from castling. Oh, very well played. We'll go ahead and develop the bishop with the pin, and place the duck back on e7. The threat here could be to capture and eventually double the pawns. Okay, duck back to f1, and then we get h6. I'm going to go ahead and capture the knight, drop the duck on e7, and like we already talked about, bishops are a little bit overrated here, and knights are a little bit stronger than bishops, I believe, because the knights can't be blocked by the duck. Bishops absolutely can. Bishops, queens, and rooks all can be cut off by a duck. Like right here, the queen can't recapture because it got cut off by a duck. So I'm happy to trade a bishop for a knight. We do get cut off from castling again. Let's play knight to d2, duck to e7, and what I might do here is like e3, c3. It'll be impossible for my opponent to stop both ways of developing my queen, and in turn, it'll be impossible for my opponent to stop both ways of castling. So we'll start with e3, and then duck to f8 to stop my opponent's castling. Oh, and actually, I've just realized that wasn't really necessary, right? Because even after duck to f1, I can just play queen to e2 right away. So c3 wasn't actually necessary. We'll play the duck back to f8, and we'll see which side my opponent prefers I castle to. Because to be honest, if my opponent allows me to castle queenside, I will also allow my opponent to castle kingside, because this kingside is a little bit weak. Queen to e7, duck to d3. Okay, let me see if I can put my money where my mouth is. I'm going to start with c3 to stop knight to b4 and queen to b4, and put the duck. I'm going to put the duck on f8. I want to be able to castle long first, and not allow my opponent to castle short and then force me to castle to the same side, right? By like placing the duck to d1. Okay, e5 push and duck to c2. If I take, my opponent takes. I take, my opponent takes back. I mean, it's probably better for my opponent, but these pawns are still looking a little bit weak. I'll take. I'll go ahead and take on e5 and place the duck on f6. Oh, my opponent says, hi, I'm a fan. That's so funny. Out of 4 games today, I've been recognized in 3 of them. Hey, this whole YouTube thing is getting a little bit out of hand. But it's still fun to see you guys in the wild. It like reminds me that it's like, oh yeah, you guys are like there. Okay, knight takes back, duck to d3. I will take the opportunity to castle, and I guess just put the duck back on f6. Okay, bishop to d7, duck to d3 suggests to me that my opponent now wants to castle long as well. I'm going to try to keep my opponent busy. I'll take with the knight, place the duck on e6, and potentially, well, not really potentially, my opponent will almost definitely recapture with the bishop, and maybe I can threaten the knight. Oh no, my opponent stops that idea. I was going to say threaten the bishop with the knight, and then cut off the defense, and then take the bishop for free. But my opponent apparently sees that with duck to f3, very solid. Let's play knight to b3 instead, opening up the rook, and the duck will place it on d8. Right, I really don't want my opponent to castle long. I want to see that short castle into this kind of open position where there's a lot of attacking ideas. Okay, we get duck to f3, and then we get the defense of the pawn with c6. Let's try knight to d4, and then placing the duck back on d8. My idea is on the next turn, I can potentially take this pawn, drop the duck on e6, and then I've just walked away with a free pawn, right? My knight is well placed, I'm attacking the queen, in a good spot after that. Okay, bishop takes. I have to take with this pawn because the duck blocks the rook, and this pawn is pinned to my queen, so I have to take back with this pawn, and the duck, I'll just place it on... Let's go f8. Let's put the duck on f8. I'll invite my opponent to castle long, and I'll just shuffle my king over, and we can duke it out on the queen side. Aha, we do get long castle, and then the duck is placed on f3. I'll go ahead and shuffle my king over, place the duck on e6, right? Annoys the bishop, frustrates the queen. And my goal here is simple. Rook to c1, maybe take this pawn, slide the queen over, look for any sort of attack that I can get on this side of the board. The fact that I am generally an attacking player, combined with the fact that my opponent has half the amount of time that I do, suggests to me that eventually we'll probably get our opponent to slip up somewhere. Okay, duck back to f3, and then we get f6. I'll play queen to d2, duck back to e6 with the idea of queen to a5. Oh my goodness, terrible arrow. With the idea of queen to a5, right? And I can even do, right, I could play rook to c1, pinning the pawn, or I could do a rook lift as well to either of these two squares. Okay, duck back to f3. It seems my opponent thinks I'm interested in attacking on the queen side, which I'm not. We'll play queen, actually let's play rook to c1 first, and then duck to e6. We'll set up the sneaky attack first and see how my opponent responds. Okay, we get duck to c3, which stops both the queen and the rook. So clearly my opponent has clocked what my idea is, and we get king to b8. Let's play bishop to f1, and then duck back to e6. Maybe in some world we can get our bishop in, even if it's a sacrifice. Okay, rook to c8, duck to c3. Let's drop the queen back, and now either our rook will get into play or our queen will get into play. Somebody has to get into play here. We'll drop the duck back on e6. The only reason I keep dropping it on e6 is because I really don't like the prospect of queen to e4 coming in with check. And actually, in this case, would also win the rook. So let's not centralize our opponent's queen. Opponent's down to 23, 22 seconds now. Bishop back, duck to, oh wait. Duck to c2 does the same thing. Okay, well played. Let's move the king over, duck back to e6. Maybe we can try for rook to b1 and then pushing the pawn. Whoa, duck to g2. Okay, the problem with the kingside attack here is that my king isn't actually there. So even if my opponent obliterates me on the king side and I have no pieces left, I just need to get checkmate over here to justify it. So let's play queen to a4 and I guess duck back to e6. Okay, opponent cutting it close. 8 seconds left on the clock. We get the c5 push. I will move my queen. Well, should I move my queen to safety or just block with the duck? Yeah, let's move my queen to safety. Let's move my queen to a5. Drop the duck back on e6. Okay, we do get this capture, duck to a6. I guess I should probably take here, right? I'll take here with check. And the duck, I guess the duck will just go to e6. That should be totally fine. Opponent is now down to 3 seconds, just barely hanging on there. Duck to b6. I'll take on a7, duck back to e6. I'm okay with this. As long as it means maybe I can get my rook out, get my bishop out, get my queen into the game. Queen to b4, duck to a8. Obviously the threat is this. Okay, let's play a little bit crazy. Let's play bishop to a6, sacking the bishop to get the rook out. And the duck, we will put it on, let's put it on c1, since that's the square that I want to move my rook to next. Oh, and my opponent forfeits on time. Actually, as my opponent forfeited, I was thinking, my opponent could just move the duck over and then there's no development of the rook. So this was probably completely unjustified. I guess you could argue it is justified if it runs your opponent's clock down in the time they calculate it, but probably not the cleanest way to win that. We do win game number 4. Let's go ahead and move on to game number 5. All right, we actually cross 1600 now. We get the black pieces. I'm feeling pretty good about the tactics we've played. I tend to mess up later in the game though. Let's push d5, duck on d2. Maybe my opponent's a London player. That would be quite... Oh, okay, e3 is not a London, though. We get duck to b4. Let's play c6, duck back to e2. All right, I'd rather frustrate this development, since there's a clear line of sight for the bishop, than this one, because this bishop is stuck to d2 anyways. Oh my goodness, okay. Opponent has disconnected, so that one doesn't actually count. Let's go to move on to game number 6. All right, nice, but it was all worth it because we got the white pieces. Let's play d4, drop the duck on d6. Not to mention it inflated our rating a little bit. 7 extra points that were not well deserved. Okay, knight to f6, duck to d2. We'll develop our knights, duck back to d6. Okay, knight to c6, duck to c3. I'm going to develop my bishop because I'd be happy to trade it off for the knight. And I guess duck to d6 is perfectly fine. Not to mention if my opponent plays e6 here, I can take, drop the duck on e7. And not only do we trade a pesky bishop for a useful knight, but we double our opponent's pawns. So that could be handy. Ooh, knight to e4 and then duck to f6. I'm not really sure I understand the idea because this bishop is defended either way. So I guess e3 is perfectly fine. Duck back to d6. f6, duck to f4. Okay, this is interesting because yes, there's an idea of like bishop back and then playing g5, duck to g3, which does trap my bishop, but there's also ideas for me of moving the knight out of the way and then coming in with the queen, which is almost checkmate. So I'm going to play the only move I really have here, which is bishop back. And the question is, do I play duck to g3? Because if I play duck to g3 on the next turn, my opponent has to move it, and then I have that square secured. But if I play it anywhere else, after g5, my opponent will probably play duck to g3. I can probably play knight back to d2, duck to f7. My opponent will take, and there's no real mate here because there's two different squares, so we'll go and play the duck to g3 instead. Oh, we still get g5, and the duck moves over. I guess my opponent doesn't have to be afraid of these two squares, as long as the duck can rotate between them. So I will play bishop back to g3, and the duck, I'll just put it on d6. Okay, we finally get the trade, and the duck moves to e4, we'll take back, duck back to d6. That was interesting because we did get the trade anyways, which is what we wanted, but we also got a semi-open file for our rook, and then a weak light square diagonal, right? Which could be a good spot for our bishop or our queen to come into play. Okay, g4, duck to e5. I guess I'll just move the knight back and place the duck on h6. I'd rather my opponent not be able to play h5 to defend that pawn. I'd rather it be f5 so that I can at least target it with like bishop to g3 or undermine it with e4 and kind of continue to take advantage of these weaknesses. Okay, duck to h2, d6. Looks like it defends g4, but we've already learned this doesn't actually work. I'll take on g4, duck to d7, and I've basically picked up a free pawn, and it's open sesame on this diagonal for my queen. Okay, duck to g6 sort of plugs this diagonal, and then knight to b4 threatens c2. So I guess I could come back and defend this, or I could play queen to h5. Queen to h5, move the duck pretty much anywhere here, for example. My opponent would take, move the duck back, and I don't know that I've actually accomplished much there. Let's give it a try. I mean, if it's losing, it's losing, but I'd rather say that I played on attack mode, basically. Let's play duck to f7. Sure, my opponent keeps the duck in that spot. We'll move the king out of the way and move the duck back to f7. Okay, and I wonder if there's some idea here of bishop to b5, right? Because now I have to prove that this was worth anything. Bishop to b5 and then like duck to d7, for example. No, it would have to be duck to c6. Then my opponent could move out of the way, queen to f5. I wonder if there's some ideas, right? Because if I have two diagonals looking at the king can't get out of both with one duck, right? So it would have to be a duck placement, and then the king would also have to move out of the way. If I play bishop to b5, and then duck to d7, there's this check. So c6 and then moving the duck back gets my opponent out of both. So let's play bishop to b5 and then duck to c6 instead. Okay, that's another way to get out of it. Duck to f7, bishop d7, but now the king might be a little bit trapped back here. Let's play bishop back to c4 and move the duck. I guess to e6 would make most sense so we don't get e6 on the board. Okay, rook to g8, duck moves to f7. This is not going to be easy to justify. Let's take on h7 and trap the rook with duck to g7, right? The rook is a little bit trapped now, has nowhere that it can actually move to on the next turn before the duck moves out of the way. So I believe we've at least won back our rook. Not to mention this knight is also trapped. Okay, bishop to f5, duck to g6. There's a very tempting check here, but the king would just move out of the way. It doesn't actually accomplish much. Oh, wait a minute. What if I play queen here and hit the king and then move the duck to d7? Oh, wait a minute. Aha. This is what I've fallen for so many times before, right? My opponent would take my queen, which I know sounds crazy, but then my opponent can just play the duck in the way and I've just lost my queen. So I'm not falling for that this time. We're taking the rook, moving the duck to d7 anyways, just to keep the king trapped. And now we have an idea of bishop to f7 and then dropping the duck on d7 because this cannot be disconnected. Sweet. We'll play that duck to d7 and there should be no way for my opponent to save the king on the next turn. That was close though. I'll admit I was very close to playing this duck to d7 and my opponent would have just taken and then disconnected my bishop from my queen. Okay, duck to e7, bishop to c2, tries for a counterattack, but we win on the next turn. Nice. And with that, we win game number 5. I'm quite happy. I do believe that I'm getting stronger each time I play these variants. I am doing a second round through. There's a lot of people a little bit confused in the comments. I am playing all of the variants the second time through, except I'm playing it to win 5 games, and I'm actually trying to apply all the stuff that I learned in the last time. Since a lot of you guys wanted to see me go a little bit deeper instead of just superficially beat a couple of players. Anyways, this game was super exciting. I love the attack at the end. If you guys did enjoy this video, please consider liking and subscribing. Let me know down below if you particularly enjoyed duck chess or if there's any other variants you'd like me to try. And I will see you guys in the next one.